These are dark times, times without hope. Men of faith claim that this is a test from God to strengthen our spirit. Perhaps this is true, or perhaps it is simply a pious lie. If it is true, darkness has come to engulf once proud humanity, and we are witnessing the end of mankind.
Hello and welcome. I'm very, very excited. This is the very first episode of The Greatest Generation. This episode is going to be about Castlevania Lords of Shadow, which I'm extremely, extremely excited to talk about Castlevania Lords of Shadow and finally show what this series is all about. So right here I have my copy of Lords of Shadow, originally bought October 5th, 2010 when the game came out. I actually also brought over here my copy of Lords of Shadow 2. Not as good of a game as Lords of Shadow, unfortunately, but and we'll get into that here too. But as I've said before, this series is all about exploring the different games that came out during the Xbox 360 generation, because I feel that generation was one of the most, if not the most important generation for video games. And I wanted to start this series with a good and positive game and not something super negative. And as I said before, this series is going to talk about different games from the generation and stuff, and some of them are going to be excellent examples, such as Lords of Shadow, which also kind of moonlights as well as a very hidden gem. Sometimes I'm going to talk about games that are bad, unfortunately. They're not always going to be great games, but this is the point of The Greatest Generation. So in Lords of Shadow, what's different about this game compared to other Castlevania games is that it is a reboot of the Castlevania franchise, essentially. It started its own franchise, and unfortunately, they kind of ended it too soon, and I feel like it's a franchise that could have gone on a lot longer, but unfortunately, that's not how it worked out. And the sequel, I feel, was, even though it took longer than it should have to come out, I still feel it came out and it was kind of rushed. But Lords of Shadow, incredibly polished game. It plays like God of War, but I think it does things so much better than God of War. There's platforming, there's quick time events, but the quick time events are more simplified than a God of War. There is the typical press mash X or mash Y or mash A or something, but there's also quick time events that have a circle thing that you have to click, and you can click any button, and that works really well with everything. More so than a God of War game. Also, the story of this game, way more interesting than all three of the God of War games, if we're being honest. Just the idea here is that you play as Gabriel Belmont, which he's a new Belmont in the Belmont clan. He's the first Belmont in the Castlevania lore, since this is all a retelling of Castlevania and everything. So the twist here, and we'll get to it, and unfortunately, if you haven't played this game by this point, it's been 7 years. Unfortunately, I'm going to spoil things here, and I will warn you ahead of time when that's going to be. Obviously, the twist in this game is that Dracula's not really in this game, and there's a reason why, and we will get to that reason why later in this video. But Dracula's not really in this game. The main villain of this game is Satan, which you will walk into this game and think, that's weird, that doesn't make sense, because, Castlevania's all about Dracula, but it makes sense when you get there. Essentially, Lords of Shadow, it's a third-person action-adventure game. You control the main character, Gabriel Belmont. Instead of having, a whip, you have the combat cross, which is a whip, but it's also, fashioned like a cross, and that's how you do all your combat. It has up to 40 unlockable combos, or just, you have 40 unlockable combos in the game. which is really cool. And it has classic sub-weapons and stuff that are known from Castlevania games, like knives and holy water and stuff too. The one thing that's really interesting about Lords of Shadow, the game actually was started, Project was started and revealed as just Lords of Shadow. It was not revealed that it was tied to Castlevania at all at the time that it was announced, because Castlevania, there were other games coming out. There was Order of Ecclesia was the last DS and last like true Symphony in the Night style game that we got, and we haven't gotten one since then. The only one that's come even close is the 360 PS3 Castlevania Harmony of Dissonance, if I'm saying that one right. I always get it mixed up with the Harmony of Despair. It's one or the other. I always get them mixed up, but that was like the Symphony of the Night type game, but co-op multiplayer, which also a fantastic game, and at some point that will heavily be talked about on Greatest Generation for sure. But so this game was originally announced as Lords of Shadow. They did not reveal it because they did not want to soften the sales of other Castlevania games. And yes, one of those games that they didn't want to soften sales was, for whatever reason, Castlevania Judgment, the horrible fighting game that they released. So they finally put out an announcement trailer in 2009. I remember sitting in this same room here, watching different trailers on my computer, on YouTube and stuff, early YouTube, and being blown away by seeing the headline that said new Castlevania game. Just being blown away that we were trying to go down the 3D route again. Unfortunately, Castlevania has a history of having bad 3D outings. Castlevania 64 is a notoriously bad Castlevania game. At the time, as a kid, I didn't think it was a bad game, but going back to it now, it's, as in I've always felt with most 64 games, it's kind of unplayable, and this one especially, not great. But I remember sitting and just being blown away, like, we're getting a new Castlevania game, and it's a reboot, but it's starring a new Belmont, and it had voice actors that you knew. Robert Carley from, I think he's on Once Upon a Time now. He was in Stargate. He's in a bunch of different stuff. He's the voice of Gabriel Belmont. Patrick Stewart is the frickin' voice of Zobek, Zobek is a fascinating character in this series. And then also the voice of Satan is Jason Isaacs from obviously things like Harry Potter. He was Draco Malfoy's father. But this game had huge voice actors, and it was a time where you didn't see a lot of like big name voice actors, actors in real life being voice actors in games. We weren't kind of there. It's not like it is today where you see that happen more frequently. At that time, it wasn't really a big thing, so you didn't see that ever, and this was the first time you actually got to see that, and that was really cool. One of the coolest things about the game is that even though the game obviously the game is split up into, there are 50 like levels essentially, but there's like 12, I believe there's 12 chapters, and then there are chapters 13 and 14 are DLC that was released later on in this franchise. Those are fine too. We'll talk about that here in a little bit. But if you add it up, as in like each chapter has like different sections, you could also look at that. There's 50 levels essentially, which is a fun way to look at it, kind of a throwback to old Castlevania. But one of the cooler things about this game, and it's in Lords of Shadow 2 a little bit, but it really was explored in this game, is obviously the point of the game is Gabriel has to quest to defeat the 3 Lords of Shadow to receive pieces of what's called the God Mask, because each one of them has a different mask. This mask is going to help resurrect his wife, who recently died like 2 days prior in the game. And so when you fight these bosses, there's these big they're almost like Colossus from Shadow of the Colossus, and you're climbing them and hitting different points on them, just like Shadow of the Colossus for PS2. It's really interesting because it's something that you didn't really see in a lot of video games at the time. Obviously, Shadow of the Colossus was its own thing, but you didn't really see that in other video games of this era. So it was nice and refreshing to see that here, especially. The most interesting character in this game is Zobek, who's voiced by Patrick Stewart. He kind of does the narration through the entire game. And I guess we'll jump into spoiler territory with this game. So the main spoiler of this game, and I'll even throw it up here. Obviously, I kind of spoiled it at the beginning, but the answer to the question about Dracula is on the front cover of this box. And I felt like an idiot after I finished this game for not realizing it, but I'll try to show it in this shot. If you look at him, look at his armor, and then I'll zoom it in here. If you see if you see on the armor here that little crest, why would he have that crest? Because he's Dracula. This is the story of how Dracula comes to be in the Castlevania universe, and then in Lords of Shadow 2. And this is what had me so excited for the game, and part of the reason why it was such a letdown. Castlevania 2, you play as Gabriel again, but he's Dracula now. Really awesome concept, and we'll get into more of that. But that is the twist at the end of this game, is you become Dracula, and then in the DLC it kind of explains how you become Dracula. Zobek is like your other helper in your clan, but in reality he turns out to be a powerful necromancer. He is the one who killed your wife, so he's not a good guy at all, but you think he's a good guy throughout most of this game. One of the coolest things, and unfortunately I don't have footage of this part in the video, is at the very end of the game after you defeat Satan. You obviously get this, you get through the main credits of the game and everything, and after the credits scroll, you get a cutscene that you think is set in olden times because you have like a cloaked figure, like he kind of looks like Obi-Wan or a Sith or something. He's walking through an old broken down church, and then he floats upwards into this platform, and he's talking to Dracula, which is obviously Gabriel. That was the big twist of finding that out at the end of this game, that he had become Dracula. His cloak gets blown off, and it's revealed he's just in a suit and tie, and you get kicked out a window, and it's revealed that it's modern times. So that was the biggest thing that had me ultra excited after beating this game and playing that. I played through this game several times. Was at the end of the possibilities of what a sequel could be. Unfortunately, in Lords of Shadow 2, the sequel's not really as great as we all hoped it would be, unfortunately. But they did stick with the modern time element mostly, and that was a cool idea. Unfortunately, the end of Lords of Shadow 2 is just you beating Satan again, and then you and Alucard, who does show up in Mirror of Fate, which is the 3DS spinoff. He shows up obviously in Lords of Shadow 2. It's you and him walking into the sunset together at the end of the game, but that doesn't make any sense to me because you're Dracula and you're a vampire. But whatever, like that game, it was okay. I actually am going to play through it again for the first time on PC now, and all the footage I've used in this video is captured from the PC port. And honestly, I will tell you straight up, if you've never played this game, you can get it if you can find a copy of it. Copies are a little harder to find than you would think for this game. You can find it. It goes for like maybe $15-$20. I highly recommend, if you have the ability to, you should play this game on PC. It looks so much better, and especially if you have a decent video card, it looks so much better, and it just visually really pops. And running it at 60 frames, it's a beautiful thing. It runs fine on 360. It runs fine. It might look a little fuzzier now, but it looks fine on the older systems and stuff as well. It's not a backwards compatible game on Xbox One yet, unfortunately. I hope that at some point it is, because I think more people should experience this game. Originally, and some other interesting facts about the game, originally the game was going to be a 3D remake of the original Castlevania game, but it was going to star Simon Belmont. However, Konami wanted the franchise to get a full reboot because there were poor sales of recent outings of Castlevania, like Castlevania Judgment, as I said. Originally, and there's footage of it out there you can find, they crafted this game as you playing as Simon Belmont, and that would have been interesting too. But I think the game that we got is far more interesting and far more a successful game than if they had just redone the original Castlevania with Simon Belmont in 3D. The other thing interesting to know, so there were two DLC packs. One was called Revere, and the other one was called Resurrection. The two DLCs tell the story of how Gabriel essentially becomes Dracula, because at the end of the game, you defeat Satan and the God Mask and all that stuff, but they don't really tell you. You just get that, end credit surprise that you're Dracula, and that's it. You don't know any more about it, but the DLCs do explain how he becomes Dracula. However, the lead producer of both of these games at Mercury Steam, David Cox, has gone on record several times saying that releasing those two parts of the game was a mistake, and that it all should have been together in the actual game. For me, the most important thing here, it was important for me to pick as the first game of this video series. I wanted to pick a game that really pops and is something I'm really passionate about. I can't think of a better game of last generation, of the 7th generation, of what I call the greatest generation, than Lords of Shadow, because it hit me like a bag of bricks essentially when it came out. Like, obviously I was super excited about it. It reserved like as soon as possible. Somewhere floating around, I have a t-shirt. I have artwork and boxes and stuff from the marketing. I have a poster. I have a ton of stuff from this game. I have the collector's edition or limited edition or whatever they called it from 360, and then I ended up getting this case because the other case isn't great and it doesn't look great on a shelf. I'd rather have a real case or whatever. So the game was followed by 2 sequels. Lords of Shadow Mirror of Fate, which was originally a 3DS exclusive, and then they did put it out on PS3 and 360 and PC as well. That game plays more like Super Castlevania 4 and older Castlevanias, and in that game you do play as Simon Belmont and you do play as Alucard. And it kind of tells a wraparound story about some stuff from Lords of Shadow. It's okay. It's a good 2D platformer, but the problem is once you've played a game like Symphony of the Night, which is like a Metroidvania game, you don't want to go back. That was the thing when I played through that game, is like I really wanted it to be a Metroidvania game, and it's not. It is a very good game in its own right, and it is a much better game than Lords of Shadow 2, that's for sure. And then obviously in 2014 we got Lords of Shadow 2 with the setting. Like, it doesn't start like a normal Castlevania game like you would think. The beginning of the game starts out in like forest areas and stuff, and that's not like, yeah, Castlevania has done that, obviously, but usually when you start a Castlevania game, you're starting at the castle and you're fighting, through the castle and everything. And this game does have that. You totally have a castle and everything, but it's not like your typical Castlevania. It also has a lot more fantasy elements to it than other Castlevania games, and that was something that interests me about this game in particular. I highly recommend. If you've never played Castlevania Lords of Shadow, if you've heard of it, maybe you've heard, if you're a friend of me out there, you've heard me talk about the game and sing its praises many times. And there are definitely, there's a crowd of people that love Castlevania that have a dislike for this game, and I understand it. But for me, I look upon it as highly up there. For me, for even last generation, it's in my top 10 favorite games of last generation. I think it stands neck and neck with games like Red Dead Redemption. Some people put Portal 2 up there. Those kind of games. Like, I really feel like it's that good of a game that you should experience it. And yeah, you can play the sequel and go through that story too. And it does definitely wrap the story up. I just didn't like that game. It just wasn't as good. And some people always argue in this game that it has a fixed camera, and they remove that. Second game, you can control the camera. I actually like the fixed camera in this game. It's very well done. It doesn't really become an issue while you're playing the game either, unlike a lot of other games that have fixed cameras and stuff. So as you'll see in some of the combat here, especially in the footage that I captured for this video, that the light magic and a dark magic thing, and that does come into play in Lords of Shadow 2 as well. But the light and dark magic allows you to do different things, and you get different pieces from the different bosses that you defeat. Obviously, as I said, there are Shadow of the Colossus type like big bosses, but then there are also bosses of well-known names from different Castlevania games, like Carmela's in this game. I can't think of the werewolf guy. He's in this game. You will fight these people in this game, and each of them give you a different piece. Like the werewolf dude whose name escapes me right now, he gives you boots that make you run faster. You get the gauntlet, which the gauntlet helps you. I believe Carmela gives you wings, so you can do the famous double jump. You get different things in here that helps you along the way, and that's one of the cooler things about this game is, even though it is a 3D Castlevania game, there were other 3D Castlevania games that definitely came out. Lament of Innocence, I thought, was a pretty solid one. And I did not like Curse of Darkness. So when they announced this, we're making another Castlevania game that is a 3D game. Yeah, I was kind of iffy about it. But then I saw that trailer and my mind was blown. I'm like, wow, we can make a Castlevania game that looks this great. But the thing that's nice about this is, even though it's not a Symphony of the Night game, it has all the different upgrades and stuff. It doesn't really have the backtracking like you would see in a Symphony of the Night game, but you can upgrade all your moves and stuff, and there's some pretty awesome kick-ass moves you can do in this game, which is cool. Another big element of Lords of Shadow is puzzle solving. There are a lot of different puzzles. Some are stupid, some aren't. They do give you the ability in the game to pay for hints, but it's never necessary. I've never felt playing through this game that there was a lot of puzzles and stuff that I couldn't figure out. I always felt like I could figure out the puzzles, and that's a sign of a good game. I remember getting it October 5th, 2010. I remember coming home and literally, like, for the next week, this is all I did. It's all I played. I stayed up every night till like 4 a.m. and till the point where it's like, I really should go to bed. The sun's coming up. kind of a thing. Getting through this game and getting through the story, and I didn't realize when I started that this was going to be a 20-hour game. I just thought it would be a linear, 10-hour, Castlevania game. It is a massively lengthy action adventure game, in the best possible way. It never overstays its welcome, which is something you don't see. Kind of games, usually they either overstay their welcome or they're too short a lot of times. Recent examples of games, like that, or something like The Order 1886. Good game, incredibly short. But here, everything falls into place. All the pieces fit. Everything matters. Everything you do in the game matters. It's definitely a shame when I sat down to do things for this episode and tried to pick the first game. It definitely came up to me like one of the first things was like, ooh, it's a Konami game, and I don't want to celebrate Konami right now because of how shitty they've become as a company. However, I think Lords of Shadow is such a great game. It should be celebrated. I mean, and obviously Konami just published it because they own the IP of Castlevania, so it wasn't developed by them. And I think Mercury's team is a fantastic developer, that they really had their say in this game and really made it well. And unfortunately, the way things are going at Konami and everything, we're probably never going to get another true Castlevania game, but I don't know. But as far as the future of the franchise, this franchise unfortunately is pretty much dead unless Konami decides to keep it up. Now, obviously, the creator of Symphony of the Night has gone on to make Bloodstained Ritual of the Night, which is a spiritual successor to Symphony of the Night, and obviously he can't use the Castlevania name or any Castlevania characters. That game was extremely successful Kickstarter. We're not going to see it until sometime next year. Really looking forward to that. Hoping that it's not just another Mighty Number 9 disaster. But we'll see. Time will tell. I never got a chance to play that demo they threw out of it, but everything I've seen and watched of it, it looks fantastic. It was not dead for Castlevania type games, but for this Lords of Shadow franchise, that is dead. They're not making another Lords of Shadow. Mercury's team is making something else right now. They've talked about a couple times, but it's like a sci-fi thing, but they haven't really said much more about it other than that. The point of this video was to show you guys, I wanted to start this series off with talking about a good and positive game, especially after I just did that episode about Mighty Number 9 and how shitty that game is. I didn't want to start this video series on a negative note, so I wanted to pick something that not only I'm super passionate about getting other people to play, but a game that I feel like is a hidden gem, and Lords of Shadow is a hidden gem. It definitely is. I mean, that's pretty much everything I can say about Lords of Shadow. It was an incredible game, easily one of my favorite games of this past generation. There are games that I definitely will come out and say were better for sure, and we'll get to them in this video series. That's what this video series is about. But for me, I wanted to kind of, stick my flag in the sand here as far as picking a good first game and a hidden gem, but something that I felt that, if you watch this and you haven't played Lords of Shadow, dude, God, man, go play it. Even today, it doesn't matter that the game's 7 years old. You will have a good time, especially if you play that PC version. It is great. Anyways, thank you for joining me on the first episode of The Greatest Generation. I hope that you like, share, subscribe to the channel. Share this video. I hope to have another episode up in the coming weeks here. I'm not sure yet what the next game will be, but we'll see. Anyways, until next time.